Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. Now, you may know the official leadership mantra of this podcast is you are owed nothing. Deliver value first. I strive to live by this, and I have done this by bathing myself in this mantra. It is on a sign that's 3 feet wide in my office. It's on hats, it's on t-shirts, it's on mugs, it's on sweatshirts. Every time I say it, my kids roll their eyes. Actually, I now beam with pride when they preempt me and they say it to me while rolling their eyes. And I'm always on the lookout for examples of this, especially in other people in other domains that are outside of the construction industry, where we can look at that and say, all right, that is the living embodiment of that principle, but a little bit different to give us a little more context to show how universal this is. And I stumbled upon one recently by listening to one of my favorite podcasts called The Tim Ferriss Show that you might be familiar with. It was episode number 782. It was released on December 11th, 2024, and it featured a man named Danny Hillis. So who is Danny Hillis? Well, this is the brief bio provided by Tim Ferriss on his show notes. Danny is an inventor, scientist, author, and engineer. While completing his doctorate at MIT, that would be the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he pioneered the parallel computers that are the basis for the processors used for AI, artificial intelligence, and most high-performance computer chips. He has more than 400 issued patents covering parallel computers, disk arrays, cancer diagnostics and treatment, various electronic, optical, and mechanical devices, and, I can't believe this is incredible, the pinch-to-zoom display interface. Danny Hillis has founded multiple companies, but his only regular job was as the first Disney Fellow at Disney Imagineering. All that's to say, he's a really smart guy, and I'm going to play this brief clip from this episode that I believe is such an incredible example of how you can live by the mantra, you are owed nothing, deliver value first, while at the same time understanding why it's so rare. So please enjoy this brief clip from episode number 782 of The Tim Ferriss Show.
Could you give a few examples of how you interact with people? Maybe because the name was invoked earlier, you could start with Marvin Minsky and maybe your first meeting, because maybe that'll lead us somewhere interesting.
Okay, so Marvin Minsky is the person who named artificial intelligence. He and John McCarthy kind of founded the field. And so when I went to MIT, I kind of knew that I wanted to do artificial intelligence, and I had read about Marvin Minsky. So I knew I wanted to work for Marvin Minsky. Mm-hmm. And I had to figure out how to do it. And the AI lab was sort of locked up in Technology Square. It was hard to even physically get into it. And you couldn't get into it unless you had a key, and you couldn't get a key unless you had a job there. So I decided, okay, first thing, I got to get into the building.
It's like Ocean's 11.
Yeah. Well, I did slip in a few times, but that wasn't going to work. It was pretty high security.
Yeah.
DARPA was paying for all of the lab. And I got their proposals and the proposals to NSF, and I read their proposals to see what is I could possibly offer here. And I read their proposals.
And you read those proposals because those were publicly available in some format, because they were government funded?
Well, they were actually in the library that was in the lobby of the building, which you could get to.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, so I'm in the lobby, so I could read the proposal.
With the Groucho Marx nose and mustache, cup of coffee. Don't mind me, right.
So I read them, and there was one thing where they said, we think it's actually important that young kids program computers, and we think even kids that can't read and write should program it. We don't know how to do that yet, but we think it's important. I was like, they don't know how to do it yet. So I will invent a way for kids who can't read and write to program computers. And then, so I went off and I invented this sort of picture way where you manipulated blocks. And then that was enough. That proposal was enough to get me an interview with Seymour Papert.
Who is Seymour?
He was the first one that did sort of educational computing.
Okay. And he had the gates to the kingdom in terms of getting you into that building.
He was inside the kingdom, right?
So what did you say to this person? Were you like, I was perusing in the library. I came across this. It seems important to your funding that you develop X.
No, I didn't give him all that backstory. I just said, hey, here's a really cool way I've come up with for kids that don't know how to read and write to program computers. He's like, oh, I've been looking for that.
Okay, got it. So it wasn't like a million things that were in these proposals.
No. He
would recognize the candidate.
Yeah, he immediately recognized that was something he wanted.
What a coincidence.
I knew who to go to. So I got hired and I got a key to the building. Okay, so now I'm in the building.
Phase 1 complete.
I'm building it.
Yeah.
I go up to Marvin Minsky's office. Marvin's never there. But after a while, I make friends and, like, where's Marvin? And it's like, oh, he comes in at night and he's working downstairs in the basement. And he's building something which is a personal computer.
Whoa.
And I was like, okay, that's great. But I had the key. You couldn't get into the basement without the key either. But I had the key. So sure enough, I go down there at night and there's Marvin Minsky with his graduate students around him. In those days, they were wire wrapping machines and there were the diagrams lying around all over the place of the computer. And of course, I'm too shy to talk to Marvin and I don't really have anything useful to say to Marvin. So I just sort of look around and I look around at the diagrams of the computers and I notice a mistake on one of them. I go up to Marvin Minsky and I say, I think there's an error here. And Marvin looks at it and says, oh, yeah, that seems wrong. Fix it. And it's like, well, you mean fix it on the diagram? I mean, he's like, oh, no, fix it on the diagram, fix it on the machine. Just fix it. And so, okay. And then then I look around and I find something else. I go to Marvin with him. I say, don't ask me every time. Just like fix the problems. And so after a while, I just started working in there. And I think Marvin just sort of assumed I worked for him. And then eventually, everybody, after I'm there for a few weeks and everybody else would get tired and go home in the morning. Then Marvin, at some point, he was like, well, where are you going? You need to ride someplace? I'm like, I need to go back by anywhere. He's like, why don't you just like crash in my basement? And then, so I kind of moved into Marvin's basement. Eventually I mentioned to Marvin that I didn't actually have a job and he gave me one. But I still sort of had my job at Logo working for Seymour. But so, that was how I got into the AI lab and started working for Marvin Minsky.
All right then, friends, I hope you enjoyed that. I'd like to highlight a few things from this clip that really stood out to me. So it all starts by having a really clear goal, and we have done a series of coaching sessions over the last 3 weeks or so with frontline sales reps, a CEO, and a VP of sales and marketing, all within the construction industry. And all three of our discussions, each one about an hour apiece, were really around having a clear goal for the organization, for the department, for the individual. And for each person, we came to the realization that until we have that clarity of goal, it's really hard for us to take meaningful steps forward. And Danny Hillis said, so when I went to MIT, I kind of knew I wanted to do artificial intelligence, and I had read about Marvin Minsky. So I knew I wanted to work for Marvin Minsky. And all I had to do was figure out how to do it. Once you know what your goals are, more than likely the obstacles that lie in your path to achieve that goal are fairly obvious. So then the question is, what activities, how can you go about navigating around it? But arguably more important is who can help you on that path. So shortly after that, Danny says, I got the proposals from the NSF, that's the National Science Foundation, I'm guessing, and I read their proposals to see what it is I could possibly offer here. So this is a small but meaningful detail, is that oftentimes people are finding ways, especially with social media, people are pretty vocal about what they're trying to do, what their goals are, what they're excited about. So just getting that information and then reading it, taking a step back and really thinking about what this other person or other company, what they really want, this information is often available. So in this case, Danny realized he had to get in the building first. So he couldn't go directly to Marvin Minsky. He had to go to another guy who worked in the same building as Marvin Minsky. So he said, I'm going to read those proposals, solve that problem. Then I'm going to get access to the kingdom. But that is just phase one. On this podcast and off the podcast, I will often ask the question, living or dead, if you could have anyone as a mentor, who would you choose? And it's not uncommon for people to name someone who is very much alive, and in many cases has written at least one or more books on the topic. And I will say, oh, you want to meet with, Tim Ferriss, he's your dream mentor. Well, have you read The 4-Hour Workweek? Or have you read his giant book, Tools of Titans? And the answer is no. And my general response is, well, one of two things are more than likely true. Is number one, that you really don't want to meet this person. Or number two, you're not really interested in doing the work. If you were to meet with Tim, it's not magic. And in 30 minutes, he's not going to be able to give you something. He has invested his time to transfer all these ideas and insights and lessons into a book. Take the time to study that. So if you ever were able to get that face-to-face time, A, you could maximize it, but B, you probably wouldn't need it. He probably shared everything that he's recommending you do. And in this case with Danny, he realized a lot of what he was looking for, the question of how can I be useful, it was right there. It was in the library. And this line from Danny is so great, where he's talking about what they're trying to do. And they say, we think even kids that can't read or write should program. We don't know how to do that yet, but we think it's important. I say, oh, they don't know how to do that yet. So I will invent a way for kids who can't read and write to program computers. So I went off and invented this. So Danny is searching for ways to be useful. He's developing something to give to one guy who at least has keys to the building so he can get in there to work with another guy. And I like how Tim asks the question, were you like, hey, I was cruising the library, I came across this. It seems important to your funding that you develop X. And he says, no. I didn't give him all that backstory. You know why? Because this guy doesn't care about the backstory. The backstory would be about Danny. It doesn't matter. It's not about you. Danny's saying, oh, you have a need? I have a solution. Here you go. I did the work. I'm just trying to be useful here. Now can I get access to the building? So Danny does it. And he says, yeah, he immediately recognized that this was something he wanted. What a coincidence. I knew who to go to. The guy says, oh yeah, we've been looking for that. And I think that is the goal. If we listen well enough and we observe well enough and we do the preparation and the planning, I think most people are open about some of the challenges in their life and things they're trying to solve. And this had me thinking about this principle in storytelling that every book, every movie, in every scene in one of those, the author, if he's doing it well, is really thinking about, from each person's perspective, answering three questions. Who are you? Where did you come from? And what do you want? And every scene in a story should have that to make the motivation and the clarity very clear. Every scene in your story should as well. And that's what Danny did here. Danny dug in and said, okay, who are these people? Where do they come from? What are they working on? And what haven't they solved? And if they haven't solved that, well, maybe I can plug that hole and then I can get access. So Danny is now working in the building, but he realizes Marvin's never there. So after a while, I make friends and, I'm like, hey, where's Marvin? And it's like, oh, he comes in at night. He's working downstairs in the basement. And here, what is Danny doing? As soon as he gets in there, he's not jumping ahead. He's making friends. He's evaluating the lay of the land, trying to figure out who the players are. He said, I go down there at night and there's Minsky with his graduate students around him. And of course, I'm too shy to talk to Marvin and I don't really have anything useful to say to Marvin. So I just look around and I look around at the diagrams, the computers, and I notice a mistake. So what doesn't he do? He doesn't just wander up to Marvin Minsky the minute he gets in the door and says, hey, Dr. Minsky, my name is Danny, and my goal is to work with you. And he doesn't do any of that. You know why? Because that is weak. He looks around and says, how can I be useful? And then he realizes by identifying a problem and communicating a problem is not what this guy wants. He wants to solve problems. And he's like, hey, yeah, you look around. Yeah, you're right. That is a problem. Fix it. So all of a sudden he realizes if I can be proactive and I can identify errors and I can just fix these errors, now I'm just part of the team. And then Danny says, after I'm there for a few weeks and everybody else would get tired and go home in the morning, then Marvin at some point was like, well, where are you going? Subtle little detail here, and I don't know the exact specifics, but it sounds like he was staying late. He was the last person there with Dr. Marvin Minsky. He's working harder. He's working longer. And all of a sudden, because of that commitment to be the last person there, puts you in a one-on-one situation with who? The guy that you were trying to work with all along. And then Minsky says, yeah, why don't you just crash in my basement? And then I kind of moved into Marvin's basement. And then he tells him, I don't actually have a job with you, so he gave me one. So think of the circuitous path Danny took. Think about all he was willing to do. And as you are trying to grow your business or build better relationships or land a new client or whatever you're trying to do, I'm going to run down this brief list, largely of verbs, and think, would you have been willing to do all of this? Number one, he defined a goal. Then he found these proposals and read these proposals to realize that he could create a solution for a different guy that had a different problem, but at least was working in the same building. So then he did that. He presented that, solved that problem, got in there, then made new friends, then inquired about the working habits of this individual, then walked in and didn't immediately try to give a sales pitch. He tried to be useful. He identified problems, then fixed those problems. All the time, he is working 2 jobs, one of which he's working for free, and he's staying late. And then, after he's delivered so much value, Marvin says, not only, yeah, I'll give you the job, but you can sleep in my basement. So a meaningful question for all of us, including me, is, am I willing to do all that to help me achieve these big goals that I have? Now, decades later, Danny Hillis goes on and he becomes really successful. I think it's easy to look back and say, yeah, it's all about relationships, man. Once he got connected with Marvin Minsky, everything changed for him. And I was having a discussion recently with a 44-year construction veteran, started work in the industry at 13 years old, never got out. And he said to me, Bradley, it's all relationships. Life is relationships. My entire success in my career is all about relationships. And he said, that is all there is. And because I was a couple beers deep and I was feeling comfortable with him, I decided I was going to push back just a little bit. And in my limited time speaking with this individual and thinking about the story with Danny Hillis and Dr. Marvin Minsky, I think saying it's all about relationships is an oversimplification. And I say, yes, it's a relationship business. Life is relationships. Everything is relationships. But underneath that is a usefulness, a willingness to look to identify problems, proactively deliver solutions, to deliver value first, to help other people. And when you do that, and when you do it consistently, and when you are an expert like this construction professional I was talking to, then you have the opportunity to build relationships. And if you look at the deepest relationships in your life, I doubt that those deepest relationships that you have are built on the understanding that the other person isn't really all that useful, that they take more than they give, that they generally draw money and time and resources from you and they don't give back. My guess is the deepest relationships that you have are ones where underlying all of it is that you and this other person together help each other get what you want. You are both actively part of that value creation. And yes, I know relationships are important. I also believe this commitment to work hard and develop an expertise and constantly be looking to deliver value increases the probability that you can build those long-standing, deep relationships. I believe that expertise, not all the time, but much of the time, that underlies the deepest relationships. All right then, friends, hopefully you found this valuable. Obviously, I want to thank Tim Ferriss and Danny Hillis for getting together and putting out this content and for the work that they do on the podcast every single week. Neither of them know I exist, but you guys keep up the great work. And my sincere hope is calling attention to this short story and breaking it down into its constituent parts would make it easier for us and our teams to go out and pursue the big goals and build deeper relationships and live by the mantra, you are owed nothing, deliver value first. That's all I got. Make it a great week.